How's it going, guys? I'm Josh, and today we are doing another reviewing your photos where you guys can submit your shots to me and I talk some serious smack. That's hopefully also constructive criticism. So I've been doing these live for a while, but backed by popular demand, we're gonna actually do a quick one that is actually edited. A couple things before we get into this. One, if you wanna submit your shots to be reviewed in my next reviewing video, you'll find instructions on how to do so in the description down below, and you should probably subscribe to stay tuned for that next video. And two, my opinions are very, very subjective. You might agree with them, you might hate everything I say, but if I'm not saying things that are polarizing, I'm not doing a good job giving you good critiques. So know that I have a style that may or may not be different from what you're looking for. And take my advice for whatever it's worth. And number three, before you listen to my advice, you should probably check out my work to see if you like my style, because you very well might not. So anyway, if you want to do that, you can check out my website, joshkatz.me, or my Instagram. Links to those things down below. Now, there are going to be two focuses in today's live review. We're going to talk a lot about composition because I recently came out with a composition for beginners tutorial. Link to that over here if you haven't seen it yet. And second, we're going to talk about editing because I feel like that's one thing that really takes a lot of these shots to the next level. And on that note, let's actually get into it. First off, I want to talk a little bit about vignetting. So vignetting is those nice black edges you see around photos that can look really nice or can look really horrid if you don't use them properly. And I've talked before about the perfect middle ground for them, but I want to give you two examples of when they work and when they don't work. So our first shot, I'm sorry Adria to use you as the bad example, but this person took a nice photo of some sort of electrical equipment that looks kind of awesome, and this is the raw photo, and then this is the edited photo, and you see they have really intense vignetting in the bottom corners that just looks messy, and they made the darks a little bit too dark. They went a little overboard with the editing, and we'll get into that later, but what I don't like about this is the corners in this photo have potential to be very cool. They're flat, simple, empty, and they're not too distracting. So I personally would have kept them as is, probably no vignetting whatsoever. And then we have someone like Alejandro, whose photo of this dragonfly is awesome. I'm assuming he used a macro lens for this. And what I like about the vignetting is, you notice it's darker on the two corners where there's a lot of color, top left, bottom right. And what's great about this is it just puts emphasis on the center. And the center is the only subject, just the dragonfly and the branch that they're on. And then everything else is just the background. There's nothing to it. The background is only just this nice, washed out, shallow focused thing that only draws your eye in toward the center. Whereas when we go back to Adria's photo, I think a big part of what made this photo nice is the empty backdrop. They kind of used negative space, the compositional rule, giving it a lot of empty room around all of this machinery, and it's nice. But if you suddenly add this vignetting, you lose part of it, and it adds this level of emphasis that kind of tries to direct your eye toward the center that isn't really necessary. So I would say just think about what's in your corners. If the corners are really, really simple and part of the photo, or at least just not detracting from the photo, vignetting is not the move. Whereas if your photo has a bunch of emphasis in the center and you really want to draw in focus toward that, and the backdrop has nothing too important going on in the corners, then vignetting is very helpful. Now, when you do use vignetting, you gotta make sure you find that nice, happy medium. And what that is not enough so that when you first look at the photo, you immediately notice the vignetting, but also just enough to help direct your eye into the center of the photo. Anyway, thank you so much, Adria and Alejandro, for these photos. On to the next ones. Next off, we have a very cool photo from Horatio, and it's an abandoned gas station with a train cruising through behind it. And this is an awesome shot. They used a 10-stop neutral density filter, I believe, which allows you to use a slower shutter speed or a long exposure photo during the day, which is awesome. And if anyone is curious about how to do that and recommended equipment, I have a whole tutorial for these. Link to that right over here. But anyway, as far as this photo goes, I think it's awesome. I really like this sign that brings your eye into the top right-hand corner, the train that's moving sort of in the opposite direction to give you this really nice balance, and it also just has some really cool colors. I also liked the height that the camera was at. Put the train right below the top cover of the gas station and above the actual pump, so it's nicely framed up in there. The framing also makes great use of the shadows, bringing your eye all the way to the bottom left-hand corner and just barely keeping them in there, which is perfect. It's a really well-balanced photo with lots of stuff happening in both of these corners here, good framing. Now, here's what I think this photo is missing, is the nice oomph of a quality edit. And if you don't have Lightroom, I highly recommend it. It's how I edit all of my photos. And you can get a 30-day free trial by clicking the link in the description. So let's mess around with this photo. All right, so we're gonna toss Horatio's photo into Lightroom and mess around with it. Now, I feel like the blacks here are just really subtle and the photo doesn't have that much pop. So the first thing we're gonna do to take care of that is we're gonna bump up the contrast a little bit and also the clarity, just a nice little bit. And then we're gonna mess around with the temperature and the tint. I feel like right now the color is very default, and to give it a nice kind of filmic feel, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna make it a little bit colder, and then I'm gonna give it a nice like green, kind of filmy look. Old Polaroid photos tend to have a nice green tint too, which I really like. And the trick here is just subtlety. So don't overdo it, make it look crazy, but give it a nice feel. So now we're gonna mess around with the highlights, shadows, whites and blacks. See how the highlights affect it. It's also nice just to sort of take it in both directions to see what happens when you mess around with it. So highlights, I think they're fine right now. I do like lowering the shadows. I think that makes the train look more dramatic. And let's give the whites just a little bit of a pop. Mess around with vibrance and saturation if you like. Also, this area is super important with the tone curve. And you can mess around with these four, which I think makes a huge impact on the photo. So yeah, we're gonna bring the highlights up just a little bit. We're gonna darken it just a little bit. And lower the shadows just a tiny bit. And there we go. I think the photo has a much more dramatic feel to it. And the last thing we're gonna do is we're gonna take it into Photoshop and use the clone stamp tool to remove this little corner of the street pole right here. I find it a little bit distracting. And actually Horatio did this in their edit, so good move on that part. It was just a little bit distracting. If you don't have the full street pole in there, you might as well just remove it entirely. Now I will say on the topic of removing stuff from your photos, there's a delicate touch that has to be done here. You could remove everything that's not beautiful, and it gets to be this crazy artistic rendering that's not even true to the photo anymore. So I recommend you can remove little things, but don't overdo it. The goal should always be to nail the composition first time around and not have to do any edits in Photoshop, but sometimes duty calls. Anyway, I think the photo is much stronger now, and that was a little bit of a inside look at my editing workflow. Honestly, a lot of it is just taking those bars and pushing in either direction to see how things change and what looks nice. It's a lot of experimentation. Next off, we've got a shot from Benny Little, and this is a very cool photo. He's used this really cool bridge in Germany to frame up his friend within it, between the trees and the bridge. And it looks awesome. You have a really nice triangle created between the bridge and the bottom part of the photo. It's awesome. Here are two things that I'd do. So first, I have a rule that I like to impose on beginner photographers and myself, and that is when I'm shooting digital, I do not use black and white. And the reason why is because black and white photos automatically look super artistic, and it's sort of like a cop-out basically, because your photos are always going to look better. So as a challenge, I urge you guys to stick with color, and I think your photos will improve more as a result. I don't think this is a popular opinion of photography. Not everyone's going to agree with me, but personally I think that's super crucial. Cropping wise, I would actually make an 8x10 image and we have another strong line here that we could have actually perfectly intersect, boom, super easy, with the corner of the photo. So suddenly I think it's a much stronger image. As far as actually shooting the photo, I don't know exactly what the area was like. Maybe he was at the very edge of a cliff shooting the photo and he couldn't step forward one bit, but I'm gonna speculate here and say, if he was able to move forward, the photographer, just a little bit, I would have tried to get a little bit lower and frame his friend so that right now the horizon line of where the sky meets the trees hits his friend right around the knees. And I think it'd be a stronger image if his feet were actually above the horizon line or right at the horizon line, because then it would look like he's sort of like floating in this weird area. So to do that, he would have just had to get a little bit lower. But, you know, this is just sort of refining what is already a very cool composition that Benny found. This is a neat shot, so well done, Benny. Thank you so much for submitting. Our next shot is from Spencer Quinto, and it's a beautiful waterfall with their friend up in front of it. And we're gonna go back to composition here. I have two pieces of advice. So what I would have done differently is I think that I would have tried to frame up your friend inside the waterfall rather than right below it, because the rocks are kind of busy and they blend into it, versus if the waterfall was right behind them, they would actually pop out much more. So what I would have done is used a wider lens or zoomed out, whatever you're using, to get closer to your subject and then actually get low and be able to frame your subject inside the files. And that would also solve another problem. And the one thing I don't like about this photo is you have the tree in the upper right hand corner, the tree branch that's a little bit distracting from everything else. It's out of focus, it just doesn't look great. So that's another benefit of getting closer, you'd be able to cut that out. But all in all, I mean, it's, again, I'm just refining an already kind of cool composition, and props on getting to this beautiful location. Anyone that goes outside and does a hike is winning in my book. Our next photo is from Cena, and they took some really cool nighttime skate photos of their friends using car headlights and cheap LED lights to light the photos. Now, a couple pieces of advice here. So one, I don't like how much his shirt just blends into the backdrop. Now you can solve this doing one of two things. One, you could try and light the photo from behind. And here are some examples of photos that I've done in the past where you use lights, even car headlights work really great actually to backlight a photo. And this helps their background actually pop a little bit so they don't blend into the backdrop. And two is asking your subjects to wear certain colors of clothing. So if they're skating at night, I would tell my friends, hey, make sure you wear bright colors or a white shirt. Same goes for if they're skating a very white obstacle, ask them to wear black so that it pops out. Also, synced up colors look really awesome. So maybe you're doing a photo shoot with your friend against a red backdrop, ask them to wear red and it'll look really cool. It looks like you actually plan your images, which is awesome. So yeah, if your friends respect you as a photographer, they'll probably be down for you to actually recommend types of clothing for them to wear. Our next photo is from Leo, and I have a couple pieces of advice for this photo. So first of all, they used a shutter speed of 1/10 of a second, and I'm assuming they had a tripod to get that slow of a shutter speed. And here's what I'm thinking. If you were to use a much slower shutter speed, your aperture is at f5, I would actually bring that way up. Maybe drop it all the way to f16, which lets in way less light. You can then use a slower shutter speed. And what's nice about slower shutter speeds is they allow you to smooth out the water. So if you could have a shutter speed of say 3 to 5 seconds or even 2 seconds, all of the ripples in the water would suddenly become perfectly just smoothed out. And as a result, the reflections would also look really smooth and much nicer. And this is sort of the secret to any sort of like cityscape photography where you have reflections. They always do long exposures. So keep that in mind. Now right now, I'm assuming this photographer was standing up at full height when they took this photo, and they framed it up so that the mountain top hit the top of the frame, which is nice. However, I don't like that there's a bunch of kind of boring area in the water where nothing's happening, pretty much in the bottom half of the photo. Now what you can do to actually make the photo a little more interesting is you can get much lower to the ground. If you actually have the camera pretty much sitting on the ground, suddenly you can have the reflections be much more dramatic and take up more of the frame, which would look really awesome. So try that out, try different heights and see how things change. But the closer you are to the water, the more dramatic the reflection you're probably gonna get. And that's it. Next photo. Our last photo, we're gonna end on a much more positive note because I feel like I've been very critical so far. And it is a photo from Jesse, who claims to be a beginner photographer, but sent in a pretty awesome shot. We're gonna take the perspective rule I was just critiquing Ian on and show you why it actually works. So for this photo, the camera looks to be as if it was basically on the ground in this photo. And as a result, you see this awesome texture of like all the little rocks and debris on the ground leading up to the subject. And it looks awesome. It makes the photo look particularly rough and dramatic. Also, the nice framing of that pipe is super cool. And the lighting is also awesome because you have one light in the back that's backlighting the subject, and it looks like whatever tool he's using is lighting him from the front, which makes this nice sandwich of lighting that really makes him pop. Really, the main point here is that it's awesome when you get super low to the ground. And had the photographer been even 1 foot higher, this pipe would have just been, the ground would have been nothing. You wouldn't even noticed it, versus now it's this main element in the photo. So yeah, don't be afraid to get super low, get super high, mess around with every single angle possible, and experiment, because your own perspective is really gonna make a huge difference in the quality of your photography. So yeah, don't be afraid to roll around on the ground. That's pretty much the moral of this video. And that seems like a nice place to end. Hopefully you all learned something from this video, because that is the main goal here. If you did, be sure to hit me with a comment letting me know how this helped, or if you thought I said something that was really dumb, also leave a comment because I love good criticism. It's just fun to read comments. Also, be sure to subscribe to see more of my videos, and if you want to submit more photos for this, don't hesitate to do so. Whether you're a beginner or an intermediate, advanced expert at photography, I'd like to see your photos. And I'm not going to tear apart a beginner because they're not as good as the pros. I'm going to give them advice that I think they could use. So no matter how good you are, don't be afraid to submit, and keep an eye out for the next photo review video. Thank you guys so much for watching. I will see you eventually. I'm gonna go eat falafel and watch the new Thor movie. What a crazy Thursday.